Welcome in, everybody. It is Backstretch Banter on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio, Channel 90. We are going into yet another big weekend. It was so good to be back this past weekend. Great to be in Richmond. Now we go to Michigan, which has a home feel for RFK Racing. Chris Buescher, certainly from the state. Jack Roush with all the stuff going on in the great state of Michigan. So we are excited to be back in that beautiful state. And let's talk about the racing from the pit crew side of things. Broc Silvers is going to be our first guest today on the show, who is the pit crew coach for RFK. And if you're new to our show, we love the fact that we really go behind the scenes of this race team. We just don't stop talking to the racers like Buescher and Keselowski. We talk to the pit crew chief. We talk to the guy who's in charge of the pit crew, the coach, the Jack guy. I mean, literally everybody there is to talk to tell you what it takes to go into a season for a NASCAR team. We love it. So Broc Silvers here today. He's the pit crew coach for RFK. Broc, how are you, man? It's good to have you on the show.
Hey, Chris, it's my pleasure. Yes, pit crew coach. I'm not the only pit crew coach. You've had my boss, Scott Bowen, on here. And so, yeah, it's an honor to be here. And our pit crews are an important part of our business here. And it's a pleasure to coach those guys.
It's really a unique job. It is a cool job. It's sports. It's athletics. It's coaching. Yet it's not what you typically think of. You think of a baseball coach or a football coach when you're growing up. I know you have a background in football. But this is another way to stay involved with athletics and coaching and to do it at a high level, but to do it in motorsports. And it is really, I think, a cool job to be a part of a pit crew, to be a coach, to find different ways to get an advantage. And we'll get into all of that throughout the show today. You just said off the air that you came from practice and you had, some nice chicken wings afterward. Give me an idea of practice. How long is it? What goes into it on a typical pit crew practice day? What does that look like?
Yeah, so throughout the week on a Tuesday, we do film review with our guys and kind of going over the past race. So we're going over Richmond week and then getting ready for Michigan. So it depends on the week coming up. Are we doing 2-tire stops? Are we doing fuel-only stops? Are we doing all 4-tire stops? And so practice is dependent on that. And so we look at the whole season and a big macro cycle and say, hey, this week we need to deload because we've come off of Darlington where we've done 10, 11 pit stops. And then we take the age of our guys in consideration as well. So some of our guys are a little bit older, a little more experienced, and they need some more rest and recovery. And so it really dependent on each individual team. But a typical day would be 4 to 5 pit stops, and then we break those down. We do use DV Sport just like almost every big-time college or professional football team, and break down the stop down to about 35 different metrics for our guys to evaluate, so they can look at themselves and our other pit crews and really look at how they did on that day, or maybe that specific corner of the car, or whatever we're trying to work on to get better on each individual team.
I'm curious. I want to break it down even further because I find it really interesting. So you said 4 to 5 pit stops during practice, and a pit stop is, we all love racing. It's 8-9 seconds, right? It's quick. So the actual physical work is what, about a minute of what we're going, less than that we're
Sure.
watching. So give me an idea of, okay, we've done the pit stop. As soon as it's over, what? How much time in between pit stops? I'm guessing you and the coaches are correcting in the moment or coaching in the moment. What does that look like for each individual pit stop during practice?
Yeah, and I think the more veteran our pit crews are, especially like the 6 and 17, there's not so much coaching every single rep. In college football, you're coaching every player every single rep on something that can change because you're calling different plays. So the receiver, whoever's doing something different every single time. Right now, we're in a pretty closed loop sport. They're doing the same thing repeatedly. So realistically, it's evaluating the film. We have a large overhead film instantly after each pit stop. We have helmet cams that we're re-breaking down that we live stream, and so we can go back and record those and watch those down to the last tenths of seconds to see if there's any mistakes. And if there's no mistakes, really, we're just reviewing it and moving on. And 3 to 4 minutes in between each stop. We don't have full recovery like you would at the racetrack for the most part, but we typically practice with 2 teams at a time. So the 6 and 17 are practicing together, 2 stops and switch in, and trying to simulate the racetrack as much as possible without obviously having a 4-hour practice, because those guys are coming off full recovery. It's like the kickoff team, or you're coming out cold every single time. So trying to simulate that the best we can, and sometimes we change that up at practice, where we'll have 4 teams down there to add some extra to practice and try to simulate that racetrack. We work with our sports psychologist a little bit on how do we simulate the pressure, especially for some of the new young guys, our development teams. And there's a lot more coaching that goes into those guys, because there's scenarios that they haven't seen before. Whether it's a right side stop with waiting on fuel, or we're doing an adjustment here and things like that do change kind of the play call for our guys a little bit. And so that's the little bit of the dynamic we have with the coaching every single guy, every single play. And I think the other hard part is really with our development guys. We have guys, we don't sign a whole recruiting class like you would in college, and you're not bringing them all up together. We have a young man that we brought in from Gardner-Webb, and he's 2 months behind everybody else. So trying to catch him up to where he's at the level of those guys that are pitting on the 60 pit car have been a lot harder for us. And so we're trying to catch that guy up, get him involved as much as possible without slowing down the stop.
All right, that is another thing that I want to keep elaborating on. This is really interesting. I think it is. And there's so much talked about when it comes to crew chief and driver relationship and spotter relationship. This aspect of it it's like the special teams, right, of football. It's there. This is where the games are won or lost, is right here, but nobody ever talks about it, right? It's the overlooked portion of what it takes to win a game. So with a new guy, let's just say you have a veteran pit crew, like you said. So you're going to do 4 or 5 pit stops a day. You're going to have the film session, but let's just say that the Gardner-Webb guy, and I don't know his name, and we're going to use him as an example, but let's just say that he has no idea what he's doing. Now he's here. He's an athletic guy. You see potential in him. The 4 or 5 pit stops that you've done, how does he factor into those? Is he a problem? Does he slow the rest of the pit stop down? Is there something you can work on individually to catch him up where the rest of the team can function as normal?
Yeah, so we bring them along slowly, and we kind of have a game plan, just like you would a camp install. So day 1, this is what we're going to do with young man or your young woman, and we're going to do this day 1, day 2, day 3, and then kind of decide at that point when they're ready for live pit stops, when they're ready to jump off the wall, when they're ready to go with a partner, because there's certain things you can do by yourself, individual skills that a guy needs, but eventually you need to have somebody hang the tire for you if you're pulling the tire off. You got to have that partnership with somebody, and then you got to start moving, and because that adds a new dynamic. And then when the car starts moving in, then that adds another dynamic to it. So we've really tried to have like about a 10-day camp install to where a guy can be ready to pit a race car. Now, is it going to be an 8-second pit stop? Probably not. And we did the same thing with like a Jacob Prawl, who you've had on this show before, and started from day 1. And these guys that are coming from college athletics, for the most part, have more of that background, and their racing IQ is a lot lower than maybe my boss Scott when he started, when he was pitting for Mark Martin and those guys. They've been in the shop their whole life, and they understand the racing side of it. So now I think that's why they really went out industry-wide and went and got college coaches for the most part. It's the recruiting aspect of it, but also help these guys understand what they need to know. These guys don't need to know how to change the oil or what the camber is. They need to understand the different types of pulls and the different types of scenarios they're going to encounter because, you have a guy that jumps off the wall for the very first time now at a Daytona 500 because you don't have the Truck Series and Xfinity for us to even go pit because it doesn't correlate that well. A guy can be really good in 5-lug and not be great in single lug, and with RFK not having Truck or Xfinity, the very first time we're jumping off that wall is the Daytona 500, the Super Bowl per se. And so we've got to really, really understand the scenario he's going to be in, the situation, and how do we help him without overwhelming him and talking about every small detail that can happen and really talk about probabilities.
For the athlete that you've recruited that comes in, that is now pursuing professional racing as a pit crew guy, And for example, let's use the Jackman, because I think the Jackman is scary. I mean, it's a quick job, but it's coming right at you. That car is barreling down right at your face. For an athlete, a football player, whatever, that's never seen a race car coming at him, is there an adjustment period? Do you notice that? Do you just have to have cars coming at him over and over again to get him not to flinch? Like, how do you build somebody up where they're not scared of their job?
Yeah, I don't know. I've never done this myself, so it's hard to say that. It's the only sport that I've never actually competed in that I'm coaching, and it's not something you can just jump off the wall yourself.
Do you ever hear the guys talk about a fear factor at the beginning they have to get over, or a hesitation because of the vehicle, or are these guys just kind of reckless, and they're not reckless, but those kind of individuals that, well, so what if the car's coming? We got, you know what I mean? Like, they're just going to jump into it.
For sure. No, and there's scenarios. This last weekend, we had the 10 car got clipped by the 20 coming on the pit road, and it was turned sideways coming right at the 6 pit crew guys, and they're all staring at it. So the pit stop wasn't great. And those are things that, the TV doesn't capture all the time of why something happened on a pit stop. It might not be a fast pit stop, but it could be something outside our control. Like Telvin couldn't set down the tire because he was about to get hit by the car, so he had to wait. So it looks like a bad pit stop, and the 6 lost 3 spots on pit road, but really there's nothing they could control. And what's really fun for me is going to local colleges like at Gardner-Webb and talking to the guys at Spring Ball, and I'll show a helmet clip of something like that. The very first clip I showed this young man Josiah, his whole team was there, and I showed a video clip of Johnny Roberts jumping off the wall, and here comes cars, and they all jump out of their seat, like, holy cow, because it's like crossy roads, but in real life, and that's what the guys explain. And so I mean, there's some fear obviously when you jump off that car, and there's a lot of video out there of guys getting hit, and TV loves the drama, I think, of that. And the other thing that people don't realize, and myself just being a huge fan of NASCAR, was that the pit road sizes change. So like the pit stall at Darlington versus the pit stall at Martinsville is going to be completely different size. The driver pit road speed's different, and also the surface. We have slick concrete where it's like not a brushed finish, especially on the West Coast. So running around there is a lot tougher, and we can spray some different things to try to give us better traction, but if that doesn't help the car in the long run, so those are all different scenarios that come into play that the average fan wouldn't know. That is really, we have to take into consideration, and the pit crew coach and the crew chief also have to know that, because that changes the speed of the stop, but also the setup of the car. And that's why you don't see 8-second pit stops at Daytona, because of some of the droops and the cambers and things. So there's more pitable race cars and there's less pitable race cars. And so we have to we just have to go do our job certain days of the week. And then there's other ones where the pit crew is really dependent, like at Darlington, where you're going to do 12 stops and tires really matter.
I think this is incredibly informative. I really do. And like you said, the average fan is not going to grasp some of these nuances because they just, well, how could they? Right? I mean, but that's why I love the show. And we introduce these concepts and really kind of, drill into what makes these things go. And I think it's fascinating. The recruiting aspect, I've covered recruiting in football for 20 years of my life. I do it all the time. It's how I've made a living in college football. And I'm very curious. You mentioned going to spring ball. How do you get access to these places? Do you have to talk to the head coach first? Does the head coach have to be a NASCAR fan? How do you, a lot of these kids still, maybe not Gardner-Webb, but they think they're going to the NFL. So how do you get in the door to say, hey, this is kind of a cool way to keep going in athletics after football?
Sure, Chris. I think the biggest thing for me was we have to take a wide net approach to this, almost like when I was recruiting in Division III. Most people don't have a clue that this is available, and I think that was a big deal, was just getting into social media, using some of our social media guys we have here to help me create business cards, but also put Twitter feeds out there and do all those kind of things. And so I think that's really helped our program, but also just educating coaches and players. And I'm from the Midwest, and so coming out here is a completely different world. And that's why you see probably, I'm going to throw this out there, probably 50% of the guys are local guys that are pit road members right now, because they grew up in this area, they knew about it, but also as an expectation that you're going to come here and train and almost try out for free. And now that model's kind of flipped, it's opened up the doors. Some of the cool places we've been is Gardner-Webb. I went to the AFCA, the American Football Coaches Conference. I've been there 10 years in a row as a coach. And so I thought, hey, I'll get a booth. My boss allowed us to do that. And so we had our own booth with our own jack, a tire there.
Did you really?
Yeah, just trying to meet coaches in this
cool.
area, because I was so far behind in this area. I didn't know anybody. So then I started going to local high school games. I met a couple local high school coaches that have been around here for a long time, and thought, you know what? The big thing for me was he naturally had a guy in mind. Hey, come check out this guy. And so hopefully that evolution helps me down the road with those guys. But then we also just reach out, cold call, and try to get a hold of the guys and use rosters sometimes from different programs. And, you had the XFL, the USFL, and those guys really, truly show me that they want to be a professional athlete. They might not have what it takes to be in the NFL, and that's exactly where Jacob Prahl came from, the CFL, and Sam Wright, our second guy, that we probably signed out of this little program of our development deal. Both came from that level. And, in the practice squad up there, they're not making a ton of money. And so those guys that are willing to do that, keep trying out, keep training, and that could play at that really high level, tells me that there's something there. And then they have to ultimately make a decision on this. Is this something they're interested in doing for a living? And it can be a great lifestyle for these guys if they can get elite at it. They're just a very small amount of guys that can do that, though. You've got probably 35 cars that are full-time, and so there's not that many opportunities. So we're not signing large classes like I'm used to, but you're more controlled on what you're looking for.
It's a good job if you can get it, I think is the best way to put it. It's a way to keep in sports. It's a way to be competitive, and it's a way to make money if you can't keep going at your own sport that you were good at in college or high school. So it's pretty cool. Let's break. I want to keep this conversation going. This is super interesting. Broc Silvers, one of the pit crew coaches there for RFK, is our guest. Stick around. It is NASCAR Radio, Sirius XM, Channel 90, Backstretch Wilders. We are in the midst of a really interesting conversation. Broc Silvers is our guest, who is a pit crew coach for RFK, and we've been going into the nuances of what makes a team, what goes into practice, what goes into recruiting, how do you identify guys, what it takes to do the job. And, it's so interesting because you need somebody you prefer to have an athletic background, but also somebody who's good with their hands, that can use tools. And it's unique. It's not like you have high school pit crews that you can just go and evaluate and go like, this guy is going to be a great jack guy someday, a rear tire changer. That's just not the way that you can do it. So you have to find guys and project in different ways. Broc, I'm curious, when you go through the process of identifying guys and coaching them up, and now that they're, fully functioning members of a pit crew, is it like, remember when, and you've been a college football coach, you've been a high school football coach. Remember when you were going through it in high school and you kind of get this blank slate of kids, and now you got to figure out, okay, this kid can throw, this kid can be a running back, this kid looks like a slot guy, this guy can, play on the outside, he's a DB. And we kind of look at body types for certain things. How do you identify the right fit for the right position on a pit crew?
I think the very first thing we do is, are they a changer, or are they a big body? A big body type guy like a linebacker, tight end, typically is going to be a jack man, a carrier, or a gas man. And maybe I'm wrong on this, but our belief is that we bring a big body in, we teach them how to do all three of those things. And then a changer, we start out by teaching them both front and rear changer. And it is a little bit different until they kind of separate themselves. And so if you had a clean slate and we didn't have guys that already had experience, you might have a fantasy draft and you would put, the stronger changer on the front and maybe the faster guy in the rear, but it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes that's the same guy on the team, and we got guys that are already been in rear changer. So I think we've learned that in the last 2 years, that guys need to be able to adapt, and I think that's the hardest thing for our development team, is those guys are learning multiple things, so they're not becoming elite in one level yet until they get on a car full time. Because my worst fear is that a guy, we need a jack man and we don't have him to put on there, whether we have an injury or we have suspension or we have a third car running that weekend or whatever it is. And so we want to have some position flexibility, kind of like you're seeing in college football anyway. We want to have those guys that are able to do some different things, and especially if we have that scenario, that way we don't have to call another team and ask for guys because we don't have a deep bench, and we also, the other thing that's a little bit different is you don't throw a new quarterback in. So we don't rotate a jackman in with the 6-pit crew at practice because it kind of throws up the rhythm. Ideally, we don't have that scenario and Dustin gets a jack the whole year and good for years and years and years. But if that scenario comes up, we also have to be able to get through the race and be comparable to what he does.
What is happening on race day with the guys between stops? Is there... I think you're in the are you in the war room during the race? I think
Yes,
you are, right? Yeah,
yes,
you're
sir.
sitting in the war room. So you got all the guys that you work with that are out there on pit road. What are they doing between races? Are you as coaches communicating? Are they talking to each other? I mean, I've been to a million races and watched these guys, and certainly there's a lot of monitor looking at, there's a lot of, that kind of stuff, but what are they hearing between pit stops, and what are you doing as coaches on race day with those guys? Is there any instant evaluation?
Yeah, so Scott travels the racetrack, and so we have communication with them in person, and then if they need something, they'll send messages, or we can send messages on those monitors on Teams, and sometimes we have cell phone service, and certain guys want more than others. Some we try to not jump to conclusions unless there's a big mistake, but sometimes a guy for example, hey, what did you see there? What can I do? But most of the time, they know the mistake. They've done them thousands of times, and they're trying to clean that up before the next stop. And very rarely is there something new that's thrown at them at the racetrack, especially at this level, that they haven't experienced before. And they're all pros. They're guys that have been doing this for a long time. So very rarely do I help them out during race day. The biggest thing I can do is help them with their film, and so we're trying to help them upload their film and get that on the monitor so they can review it. Because what they have to do before the upload of that monitor on the thing is make sure those lug nuts are tight. Because the worst case scenario is we send the car back out there and we lose a wheel and we're suspended. Our race is over, and guys like Chris hunting the playoffs right now. That's the worst thing we can do. So the very first thing they do when they get off pit road is go double check what they felt, what they saw is accurate, and the lug nuts tight on that race car. And then at that point, they can communicate with each other and what they saw and what they can do better. And sometimes that is how the car's coming in the pit stall. Is the driver coming in a little bit hotter than they thought, or is he driving in a little bit deeper, a little bit farther, and they're all going to make an adjustment together? Or what's the next stop going to be like? Is maybe I got that lug nut really, really tight there, and it's going to take a little bit longer, and kind of communicating that with everybody else.
Broc Silvers, our guest here on Backstretch Banter with RFK Racing, Sirius XM, NASCAR Channel 90. Let's dive into the film study because, again, you're a football coach. I cover football. When I think of film study, I think of we're going through, this is what a team did as we're preparing for a game, or this is what we did. We'll go over, clean up our mistakes, which certainly that's what you're trying to do. But like you said, this is a repetition sport. I mean, it's like you're running the 22 dive over and over and over and over again, right? So what is different on film from pit stop to pit stop? If there's 5 in a day, what are you breaking down that would be different, that you could coach on, that you could correct?
Sure. There's about 35 things that we look at on every single stop that we break down. So you're pretty much breaking down the time that it takes for us to do each individual piece. And this is where it becomes more of a relay race, where the front changer has to take the lug nut off, pull the wheel off before the jackman can index that tire. And so it's a relay race in terms of handoffs, back and forth, back and forth. And so really that's the biggest thing, is trying to make sure that, the right front complete time was this. And if it wasn't the time that we give them as terms of like a goal maybe, then what happened in that individual stop that we can do better. And there are a few things, and you're talking tenths of seconds that make the biggest difference anymore in this stop. And so that's what the guys are always trying to do, is shave a tenth off. How do we get a tenth better? Where is it worth the risk of being faster to pass cars on pit road, but also not risky enough that's going to cost us or our driver a race. And that's the biggest thing. It's the biggest battle we have. And we have two really good in-house pit crews here that are very, very fast. And so it's always a challenge to almost turn them down to say, hey, the risk tolerance is this. This is not worth it. But thankfully, those guys are veterans and they understand, hey, we're the lucky dog here. We're the only car on this pit cycle. Let's go for a really fast pit stop and see if we can't learn something. And that's where they've been able to do that. And then if we're under green, like we're at Richmond and we've got a 10-car lead, all we got to do is pit that car in 10 seconds to get it back out there, and we're gonna give ourselves a shot to win. So those scenarios, I think, are the biggest thing, and that's the hardest thing for our development guys is to understand those scenarios because they haven't lived, eat and breathe this like they did college football, and so you're right, you're breaking down 22 dive, you're breaking down inside zone, but down to the 100th. And so that was the biggest adjustment for me, is not looking at a holistic picture of more individualized everything, because we break down helmet cams for each individual guy, and we still grade it like football. Most coaches grade film, and so we still grade film to try to give these guys that same thing, because maybe that's the world they're coming from, they're used to anyway, is being a little more subjective and saying, hey, this is where we can get better. But then we can track guys working as coaches. Where can we help them if they're struggling on a pull or they're struggling on this tire roll or whatever it is? And so it helps us kind of some red flags. Hey, let's go really dive into this. And then we use some dartfish programs, some like ghost car kind of stuff, and really look at our guys versus our own guys. The problem in this sport is we don't get film from Hendrick Motorsports. We don't get film overheads of Joe Gibbs. You get the TV copies you can go look at. So we don't trade film like you would, so you don't get other teams. And so you got to really try to look at what other people are doing, rely on what people say from the racetrack, and then compare apples to apples. Because if we're waiting on fuel and they're not, that pit stop's going to be a little bit slower than other teams. And so that's the hardest thing, is to understand the strategy also plays into this thing. And so really, we're not the show. We're part of the show. We're a big part of the show, but understanding where we fit in as a pit crew member.
Are there any stars in the pit crew world, as far as, we know this guy is the best and the best of what he does, and he's going to demand a certain paycheck, and if you don't pay him, some other team's going to go after him? Like, is there a layer system to guys? I mean, I'm sure everybody's trying to find athletes and develop them, but are there like defined experienced stars, if that makes sense, in the pit crew world?
Absolutely, I believe there is. Unfortunately, I haven't been in the sport long enough to be able to name all those guys. I've only been doing this for a couple of years now, but most of our guys on the 6 pit crew were experienced members that came from another team, free agent per se. And so when we signed them, we knew we expected to be getting top-level athletes. They've never worked together. The difference, I think, here is guys seem to try to stay together when they're good. The 6 won the Mechanics Wear Award pit crew member. They were the most valuable pit crew in the playoffs last year. And so if I was a new team and I wanted to have a really good pit crew, you're going to go grab that whole group. You're not going to grab just a piece of it, because you know how they function together. Because just like any other major sport, one guy himself cannot do it by himself. Yes, the jackman's valuable, but if the tire's not going on or not getting pulled, that jackman is no more valuable than anybody else. So really, it's all 5 guys functioning together at a very high level, being very clean. And then there's a top-end speed based on just what you're able to physically do. So I think that's why you're going to see the big arm race for athletes. There's ex-NFL running backs on pit crew that are pit crew members now, because they know there's tenths of seconds that can be stolen by running around the car or whatever they deem, each coach deems as important. And so I think that's our biggest thing, is I believe our top guys are elite, and every team out there would love to have guys like we have on the 6 and 17. It's just trying to get them to function together thousands and thousands of times.
It's really interesting, this whole world of pit crewing, and I guess that makes a lot of sense, that if a team has rhythm together, it certainly stands out from the individual, and it's, and if you have a good one, it can absolutely make a difference when it comes to winning or losing a race when it's all said and done. You said you've been doing it a couple of years, Broc, and Broc Silvers, our guest, who's a pit crew coach for RFK. How'd you get into it? How'd you find your way into this world?
Long story short, my dad owned a motorcycle shop growing up, so we went to a lot of different types of racing, whether it's drag racing, NASCAR racing, and I'm from the Midwest, and actually probably 20 miles from Carl Edwards' hometown, and so I watched him growing up a little bit, and just fitting that I ended up here. And a buddy of mine in college football had a friend that he GA'd with that ended up at Hendrick Motorsports in the same role that I have now. And he thought, Brock, you'd be perfect at this if this ever came up. And so we worked together, and opportunity arose, and I interviewed for the spot, or I applied, I guess, and Scott thankfully interviewed me, and it worked out. And for me, it was an opportunity to work in professional sports. I didn't see myself making it for the Carolina Panthers, and so I thought, I'll take an opportunity to go work in professional sports and better my family and our situation. I've got my wife and my 2 young children, and I have a teenager as well. So trying to give them an opportunity to get into professional sports, hopefully my son follows in his footsteps, and I'm hoping someday he becomes a pit crew member. And so for me, it was more about giving opportunities that maybe we weren't going to get there in small town Missouri.
Yeah, and you're competing. You're competing at a high level. You're competing for big prizes, and it's got to be cool just to be able to stay a part of a team, to be able to still compete, even if your, physical playing days of football and stuff like that is behind you. It's awesome. It really is. It's pro sports. It's a unique way to make a living, and I'm glad that we're talking about it so more people know that this is pretty cool. You can get into this, and if you have a desire to do it and a knack for it, it's not a bad way. Not a bad way to keep your competitive juices going and to make a solid living and to be a part of a professional sports organization. It's pretty cool. On race day, when you look at your guys from an attitude perspective, is there, I always think of the schmaltzy coach speak the speech that happens before in every locker room, with the guys, and you try to get them fired up for the day. Is there a big grand speech that's given to the pit crew? Is there a general strategy and attitude depending on the track? Like Michigan's coming up, so I don't know if there's a specific way of looking at Michigan as opposed to Richmond, but what is that like in the pre-build-up for the coach of a pit crew?
Sure. A lot of times on Thursdays, our last day of practice, Scott gives them a last-ditch spiel on, what the day's going to look like. But most of the time, it's the pre-race meetings are with the crew chiefs themselves and talking to the whole team, because the behind-the-wall is just as important as the over-the-wall guys, and nobody talks about them and their contributions. You got guys that are the tire specialists that's also throwing the hose, and so, or waving the sign in or doing different things, and that's completely left out when people talk about the pit crews for the most part, especially on the TV side. But those guys are just as important as what we do over the wall, and especially the coaches. So I think that's a big deal, is the crew chief being on the same page and letting our guys know, and that communication of, hey, this is the pit stop we're going to do. And sometimes that comes down pretty late, last second. Our strategy might be to stay out, and then we see that everybody else is pitting right now, and they change that, so we have to be ready. And I think that's the very hard thing, is you're ready in a fire suit for 4 hours in a row. Some guys are going to take their helmets off, and so you even jump and go to the bathroom not knowing if you're going to cut a tire down, and can you get back in time, and you got to, what's the risk on that? So that's the crazy side that I never thought about, is they're really on the sideline, ready to go at any moment. Kickoff only happens after you score a touchdown, so when that's coming up. You don't all of a sudden just kick off randomly on first down, and I think that's the fun, unique, challenging spot. And you're right, these guys that can do this at a very high level, they can do this for a long time too. And I'm kind of putting a plug in for the guys that want to contact us, but these guys are working into their 40s. In the NFL lifestyle, you average 3-year lifespan, and so these guys are not making maybe NFL type money right away, but they're getting paid, and they're able to take care of their family very well, and they can do it for a long, long time. And the injury rate's very low. It is a repetitive sport, but it's pretty non-contact, and I think we do a really good job with our sports department, sports psychologists, and our trainer of limiting their reps physically.
There's a lot that goes into that too. It's awesome to talk to you, man. Thanks a lot for hanging out today. I wish I could do it all day. Thank you.
It's our pleasure. No, thank you very much.
That's a pleasure. Broc Silvers, who is a coach on the pit crew side for RFK. Let's take a break, and Tyler Wolfe is going to join us, who's an archivist and curatorial associate for ROUSH Automotive. Big event coming up this week in Michigan. We'll talk about it next. Stick around. It's Backstretch Banter. We're back here on Backstretch Banter, Sirius XM NASCAR Radio Channel 90. Backstretch Banter with RFK Racing. It is great to be here. We are going into Michigan this week, and let's talk to a guy. By the way, Kevin Woods is hanging out now, our old friend who has been a part of this show many times. He was an official RFK employee, and a very important one at that. But we got a great guest with us right now. Tyler Wolfe is joining us, who is in Michigan, who is an archivist and curatorial associate for the ROUSH Automotive Collection, which is Jack's baby there in Michigan. Tyler, great to have you, man. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Give us an idea. Tell us about the ROUSH Automotive Collection. For those that have never seen it, what is involved? Because this is kind of your baby to put together, right?
A little bit, yeah. We are Roush Industries, private automotive museum here in Livonia, Michigan. We're comprised of Jack's private collection of cars, a lot of vintage Fords from throughout the years, as well as a bunch of Roush Fenway RFK vehicles from throughout their history. About 115 cars on display on any given day. So. We are,
it's actually it's a spectacular sight to see. Chris, what I would like for you to say Tyler's title 3 times in a row, real quick again, please.
The Archivist, Curatorial Associate. Did I nail it?
Professional.
Archivist, Curatorial
Absolute
Associate.
professional.
Archivist, I think being an archivist is pretty damn cool. I think that's one of the that's actually one of my dream jobs, because I get so into collecting history in different little, like, honest to God, like being an archivist is. You have a really cool, you have an automotive job when it comes to being an archivist. Give me an average day. What goes into making sure you have the right cars on display for any given moment?
Yeah, I will say one of the great things about working for a company like Roush is that not every day is the same, but I do a lot of corporate and group tours. We'll do press. I did a newspaper interview this morning. I'm actually in the middle of prepping some loans to go out to a couple of different museums. We got items headed down the NASCAR Hall of Fame for Carl Edwards induction next year that I'm working on loan documents, talking to legal about that. The museum inventory itself doesn't change dramatically day to day. We have a second building offsite with some storage where we have some cars that rotate in and out, but kind of what we got is what was pretty much always here. Though we share with those folks down at RFK a little bit too, and keep their display for space fresh too in their museum.
I would say, Chris, if you ever get a chance to go up and visit the the museum, it's not your typical museum in the sense that it's not. It's just this it's huge building full of all types of cars, and we'll have Tyler talk about that in a second, because it's not even just race cars. I think there's things in there like Jack's father's tractor and his first car. Yeah. It's not all race cars. So that's one of the things that strikes me about it is just how many cars in there, Tyler, would you say total?
Give or take 115. Yeah.
You're talking about a massive amount of cars, and not all just race cars. A lot of race cars from a lot of different disciplines. And the thing that always strikes me is when I see the cars that I can remember running is they're pretty much just placed in there as is. So you'll still have there was a car that they had in there that I remember years ago. NASCAR got mad because the decal was too close to the number, and I had to literally at the track. You couldn't do this anymore because you wrap cars, but I had to cut the decal and move it. And that car's in there. So every time I go in there and see the car, I remember literally being at the racetrack 20 years ago, cutting this thing up. Or a few years ago we had Jeff Burton interview Jack in the museum, and one of his cars was in there. I believe. I can't remember which one, but it was in there. And Burton remembered running the car where he ran it, and he showed us. He's like, look here where I can't remember exactly, but he was like, look on the corner here where I cut a little bit of hole in the pad where I put my phone or something. I can't remember what it was exactly, but he remembered doing some little tweak to it during the race, and it's still sitting there with that tweak in it, and it was just kind of interesting. With that stuff's just kind of straight off the track. That makes it even more interesting.
Yeah, all the race vehicles have some real pedigree. They're oftentimes significant race wins. We have a Daytona 500 winner. We've got multiple championship winning cars. We've got oftentimes a driver's first win car gets saved, or like you said, sometimes they're unique in their construction. We got a lot of road course chassis that get set aside. Even the car Mark Martin took to Suzuka in '97, that's in here. So
that's got to be a fan
collection, favorite. Man. Yeah, I got to go see this thing. By the way, people can see it on Friday, right? On Friday, there's a Roush open house.
Yeah, we're doing our big annual open house.
Tell us about it, please.
So we've been doing this. We actually prepping for this podcast. I discovered this is actually our 20th anniversary of hosting the open house. We used to have 2 a year ahead of the Michigan races, but of course Michigan's down to the one date, so we're doing the one. But the open house starts at 5 o'clock. The museum is open all day, 9:30 to 4. For tours, but the open house kicks off at 5 o'clock. We're going to have door prizes. We're giving away tickets to both of the races, both the Cup and the Xfinity Series races this weekend. We've got an engine building demonstration. We've got a classic car cruise in. We're going to have both Chris and Brad in to come sign and do a little bit of autograph session. They're going to get here probably at 5 o'clock, and that'll kick off probably closer to 5:30. But we're limiting that to I think 100 wristbands, and then we recommend folks get there a little bit ahead of time because Brad does have a little bit of a local fan base here, and people turn out.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Interesting. We've been doing this for quite a while. Tyler, you know, the museum is obviously part of what you do, and you talk about being the archivist, and there's all types of things. Tell one of the more amusing stories I recall. If you could tell a story about how a couple of years ago you guys found the trophy from actually the first win, Jack's first NASCAR win, Jack and Mark at Rockingham, and it'd been missing for like, I don't know what, 30 years, and you guys just come across it in the box. So it kind of reminds me of that Raiders of the Lost Ark at the end when they just go through that pan out and there's just boxes everywhere, and just somewhere in there's that first trophy. But tell that story if you could.
Yeah, I love that story because we were prepping. We used to have a spring open house that happened outside of the NASCAR schedule. And it was a rainy day that day. We had rain in the forecast, and my coworkers were like, "What if we pulled some of the old trophies out of storage and put up a display of those?" And it's like, I guess I can do that. But I was climbing through our storage areas, and I found a dusty box, and I opened it up, and I recognized the race name on the trophy as being the first ROUSH Racing win back in 1989 at Rockingham. But it was in pieces. It was in I think 3 or 4 pieces. 80s trophies as they are, it's made of plastic, so all the threads were stripped out. So I said, okay. There was a trophy shop around the corner. I said, okay, let's go over there and see if they can do anything for us. And they put it back together over like a day or two. And we did our little trophy display for the open house. And then Jack wasn't around. I think he'd already left for Talladega at that point. So I texted them a photo of it on Friday, I think just before qualifying happened. And Ricky Stenhouse sat on the pole. And he's kind of thanks and a thumbs up. And Ricky went on to win the race that day, on Sunday rather, breaking what I think was a 2 or 3 year winless streak at that point. So of course after the race, I started getting texts from Jack, and he's like, "I'm gonna have to come see you tomorrow morning." And I'm not really on Twitter, but I have a buddy from high school who was texting me on Monday, and he's like, "The boss man's giving you a shout out down at lunch. You guys were doing some sort of post-victory luncheon," and I apparently was the determining force for that. I gave him an omen, I guess, is what I think how he termed it. But I kind of take credit for that race win.
I think you certainly should.
Yeah.
Pat yourself on the back. Why not?
Yeah,
you might want to come up with another omen. We need one in the next couple of weeks.
I know.
We need one for Michigan, please. Let's get one of those this weekend. Tyler Wolfe is our guest, Archivist, Curatorial Associate for ROUSH Automotive. Let's break, come back. We'll finish up. We'll talk more with Tyler next right here on Backstretch Banter.
That's a great segment, guys. I love that story. We're at 42:25, and we got to go to 48.
Okay.
Not a problem. Chris is a professional.
Here's what I'll do. I'll introduce us, and then I'll let you ask the last couple, and then we'll wrap it up.
All right. I got a couple. We're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, coming down here. 3, 2, 1. We're back here. It's Backstretch Banter, Sirius XM NASCAR Radio, Channel 90. We got a few minutes left to go. Want to thank everybody involved. Our producer back in D.C., Alec Walt for Sirius. We love him. Got to thank Elijah Burke and Thomas Burfield, Kevin Woods. I guess we could thank Brandon Lee, of course, but great people that put together the show every week. We love them, and especially you, Brandon. You are the best. But Kevin's been hanging out. Tyler Wolfe is with us, who is an archivist and curatorial associate for ROUSH Automotive in the collection, which is in Michigan. Woods, we got a big race in Michigan this weekend. Go ahead, keep talking to Tyler.
It's always a big race in Michigan, and we're the defending winner. So I think one of Jack's most successful tracks. I remember back in the day, you'd look up and he'd be up in his P51 doing barrel rolls and stuff over the track during practice. Interesting things like that. Tyler, speaking of flying, in the museum there you have you have the O2 plane crash.
We do.
Rooms for the plane, which I think is one of the more interesting pieces. If you want to talk about that.
Yeah, we have the air cam, the lightweight experimental plane that Jack crashed down into the lake in Alabama there back in 2002. It was sort of a deal where it wasn't Jack's plane at the time, and of course, once that happens, you kind of have to buy it.
He bought it,
of course, he decided to hang it up on the wall to remind himself every day of just how fortunate he was to have survived that ordeal. But
there are easier ways to buy an airplane, right, than to run it in a power line.
For sure, yeah.
But hey, another story for another day. What's your favorite piece in the museum?
Oh man, that's always a hard one. It's like picking a favorite kid because there's way too many of them, and I don't know. I was a huge Mark Martin fan growing up, so I usually default to we have a '94 Mark Martin Valvoline Taurus. I think that to me is just like peak 1990s NASCAR, the big graphics, it's just iconic, I think, and it's a car I'm grateful to get to take care of every day.
It's certainly.
What do you do? Well, Woods, I was just curious what they do to take care of the cars. How do you keep them all pretty and fresh and beautiful?
The honest answer is they don't go outside very much.
Yeah.
So keeping them inside keeps them pretty pristine. We have 2 employees who basically their entire job is to come in every day and dust and air up tires. That combined does a pretty good job on its own. And then, we wash them, we polish them and wax them every once in a while. But it's most of the stuff in the museum doesn't run as it sits. It's an intentional choice you have to make. They can either look pretty or they can look like they run. And in the case of NASCAR stock cars, most of the stuff is functionally obsolete, as you guys know, in probably 3 to 4 seasons, if not sooner. And it just makes more sense for us to try and preserve them as best we can. But,
Well, I'll tell you, Chris, it's a fantastic place to go. You have to check it out sometime. It's oozing a history. Every time I'm there, I hit the gift shop. I buy a couple of when I first started here, we were still ROUSH Racing, and they still have ROUSH Racing merchandise in there. So every time I get back there, I try to buy a couple of pieces of the old ROUSH Racing merchandise, which is kind of ironic because
the retro stuff always does well for us.
It is amazing. I for all these years, for some reason, I didn't save any of that, because you don't think about it at the time. And what? I used to get a box full of every year. Now something I actually literally go in and pay $20 for, so it's kind of amazing. But hey, I love that stuff. Love the old days. Love to remember those times. So Tyler, we appreciate you joining us. So everybody, if you're in the area, you make sure you get out to the fan night here this Friday and check out the drivers and Jack in the museum. Yeah,
and we're open weekdays too, and it's free. So stop by anytime, not just Friday.
That is Chris's favorite price right there, free.
Oh, you kidding me? I'll be there tomorrow. If it's free, believe me, I'll find a way. But Friday, it's this Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern, an open house. There is going to be 100 tickets, wristbands for the autograph session with Brad and Chris. Brad, obviously, huge fan base, being is it a Michigan, Michigander? How do you say the Michigan natives?
Michigander is preferred, I think.
Michigander, there you go. I was pretty close. So that's happening this week. Go check it out. It's going to be a heck of an event, or just go whenever it's open, because it's a great place to take some time, and might be better on a day that's not as crowded, just to really go enjoy some of the vehicles and to see Jack's collection. I think it's fantastic. Plus, it's got to be cool to live and work in Michigan. Just historically, is that one of the coolest honors, to be in the Archivist world, to work in such a place that loves automotives and Fords like Michigan?
Yeah, I'm not a native Metro Detroiter, but I moved here about 15 years ago, and it's such a happening place right now. I really do love living down here.
Hey, Chris,
growing.
One last thing I wanted to ask Tyler about, Chris. You'll find this interesting. Tyler, the craziest thing I always find when I'm up that way is, even outside the museum there, in that area, all the cars driving around that they're testing, and they're like covered up with cardboard. And like Chris, it's the most bizarre thing. It's the automobile manufacturers are testing out the new stuff. They don't want you to see it. So everywhere you look, there's just cars driving around the town there with covered up, and it is insane. I guess you get used to that, huh, Tyler?
Yeah, I believe it or not, I actually did that for a couple of months for my current job. They call it ORVT, on-road vehicle testing. I did that for about 4 or 5 months prior to working here. So
that's kind of cool. That's a whole nother world, man, in Michigan when it comes to car manufacturing. Well, Tyler, a pleasure, man. Thank you so much, and have a great open house this week, and enjoy the race. Thank you, sir.
We're looking forward to it. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to talk to you. That's Tyler Wolfe, who is a archivist and curatorial associate for the ROUSH Automotive Collection. And if they have all that cool throwback stuff you're talking about, I might have to go and spend a few shekels because I love the old ROUSH stuff too. All right, Mr. Woods, we are done. Let's go get a W in Michigan. Let's get the 17 locked in the playoffs. That would be fantastic. In the Fifth Third Bank Ford Mustang. But if it can't be them, the 6 Castrol Edge will do just fine. We're done for the week. It is Backstretch Banter with RFK Racing. I'm Chris Childers.